The October sunlight hitting the coast of Maine was not warm, it was surgical. It sliced through the pine trees surrounding the Sterling estate, turning the ocean into a sheet of blinding, hammered silver. It was a light that exposed everything, every crack in the granite cliffs, every withered leaf on the ground, and every fine line on a human face. Inside the east wing of the estate, Gabriella kept her back to the windows. She preferred the shadows. At 32, she lived her life in the periphery, dressed in charcoal wool and oversized cardigans that swallowed her figure. She was the estate's resident restorer, a woman hired to tend to the gilded frames and fading canvases that Felix Sterling had spent a fortune collecting. Gabriella dipped her brush into a pot of solvent. The smell was sharp, chemical, and familiar, the scent of erasing mistakes. She was currently working on a 19th-century landscape, removing decades of yellowed varnish to reveal the vibrant green beneath. It was ironic work for a woman who had spent the last 5 years adding layers to her own history to hide the truth underneath. She worked in silence, her movements precise and rhythmic. Her hair, once a wild, golden mane, was dyed a severe dark brown and pulled back into a tight, unforgiving knot. A long, pale scar ran from her hairline down behind her left ear, disappearing into her collar, a physical map of the night her old life ended. To the world, she was Gabriella, the quiet artisan with the steady hands. To the ghost staring at her from the far wall of the gallery, she was someone else entirely. We worship the image because it is safe, forgetting that a photograph is just a memory holding its breath. The heavy mahogany doors of the gallery creaked open. Gabriella didn't jump. She had memorized the cadence of those footsteps months ago. Slow, deliberate, heavy with the weight of a silence that never seemed to lift. Felix Sterling entered the room. He was a man who looked like he belonged in a black and white photograph himself. Tall, with shoulders that carried an invisible burden, Felix was 40 years old, but possessed the gravity of someone much older. He wore a heavy tweed jacket and a scarf that seemed more like armor than clothing. His eyes, a piercing, intelligent blue, were always scanning the room, checking the humidity monitors, checking the locks, checking the past to make sure it hadn't moved. He didn't look at Gabriella. Not really. He looked at her hands, checking the progress on the frame. "The humidity is rising," Felix said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of small talk. "The storm doors need to be checked." "I adjusted the climate control an hour ago, Mr. Sterling," Gabriella replied, her voice soft, kept purposefully flat. She didn't look him in the eye. She focused on the gold leaf she was applying. "The humidity is holding at 45%. "Good," Felix murmured. He walked past her. He didn't stop at the landscape she was restoring. He didn't stop at the Rembrandts or the Turners. He walked, as he did every morning, to the alcove at the end of the gallery. There, bathed in a specially designed, UV-filtered spotlight, hung a single photograph. It was large, framed in simple black wood. The image was grainy, black and white, taken perhaps 10 years ago. It showed a young woman standing on a windswept pier laughing. Her hair was wild, catching the light like a halo. Her head was thrown back in pure, unadulterated joy. She looked fearless. She looked alive. Felix stopped in front of it. His posture changed. The rigidity left his spine. He put his hands in his pockets and stared at the face of the woman in the photo with an expression of such profound, quiet devastation that it made the air in the room feel thin. Gabriella watched him from the corner of her eye. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a painful, frantic bird trapped in a cage. She knew that look. She knew that photo. She remembered the day it was taken. She remembered the salt on her lips and the sound of the camera shutter clicking. She remembered being that girl, Elise. But Elise was dead. Or at least, that's what the police report said. That's what the newspapers had printed after the accident, after the fire that had consumed her studio and left behind nothing but ash and a body too damaged to identify. Gabriella had let them believe it. It was the only way to escape the debts, the threats, the men who had set the fire. Now, she was a ghost haunting her own eulogy. "She looks happy today," Felix said. He wasn't talking to Gabriella, not really. He was talking to the room, to the silence. "She always looks happy, sir," Gabriella whispered, wiping her brush on a rag. "That's the nature of a photograph. It doesn't change." "That is its tragedy," Felix corrected, turning slightly. For the first time, his gaze landed on her. "She stays happy. And we just get older. We get colder." He walked over to Gabriella's workstation. He stood too close. She could smell the scent of old paper and rain that clung to him. He was a handsome man, in a severe, ruined sort of way, but he was frozen in time just as surely as the girl in the picture. "I have a request, Gabriella," Felix said. "Yes, Mr. Sterling?" "The frame on the photograph." He gestured to the alcove. "It has a scratch, a hairline fracture in the bottom left corner. I noticed it this morning." Gabriella froze. She had never touched that photo. He never let anyone touch it. It was his altar. "You want me to repair it?" she asked. "I want you to make it perfect," Felix said, his eyes darkening with intensity. "It is the only thing I have left of her. I bought it at an auction 3 years ago." The photographer said the subject vanished. "A mystery." He looked back at the laughing girl. "I don't want the decay to touch her," Felix whispered. "I want her protected. Can you do that?" Gabriella looked at her own face on the wall, the face of a girl who no longer existed. Then she looked at the man who loved that ghost more than any living person. She realized with a sickening clarity that he was asking her to preserve the very lie that kept them both prisoners. "I can fix it," Gabriella said, her voice trembling slightly. "Good," Felix nodded. "Do it now. I'll watch." He pulled a chair over and sat down, his eyes fixed on her. Gabriella stood up, her legs shaking. She walked toward the photograph, toward her past, knowing that she was about to touch the glass that separated the woman she was from the woman he loved, under the watchful eye of the man who would never suspect that the ghost he worshipped was standing right in front of him, holding a bottle of glue. The silence in the gallery was no longer empty. It was heavy, filled with the scratching sound of Gabriella's scalpel against the blackwood frame. Felix sat less than 3 feet away. He had pulled a velvet armchair from the corner, disregarding the strict curatorial rules about furniture placement. He watched her work with an intensity that made the skin on the back of Gabriella's neck prickle. He wasn't watching the frame, she realized with a start. He was watching her hands. For 20 minutes, the only sound was the wind rattling the storm panes outside and the steady rhythm of her breath. Gabriella worked with the focus of a surgeon, but her mind was a riot of noise. She was repairing the shrine to her own ghost. Every time her hand brushed near the photograph, near the laughing mouth of the girl she used to be, she felt a phantom sensation, as if she were touching a mirror that refused to reflect her current face. "You have very steady hands," Felix said. His voice was soft, breaking the trance. "Most people tremble when they are being watched. You simply stillness." "Trembling damages the art, Mr. Sterling," Gabriella replied, not looking up. She kept her eyes on the fissure in the wood. "In my line of work, nerves are expensive. And what is the cost of a mistake?" Felix asked, leaning forward. "Erasure," Gabriella whispered. She applied a drop of binding agent to the crack. "If I slip, the history is gone." Felix hummed, a low vibration that seemed to resonate in his chest. He stood up and moved closer. He was now standing directly behind her. She could feel the heat radiating from his tweed jacket, smelling the faint, crisp scent of old paper and the sea air that clung to him. It was a scent of isolation, clean and lonely. "I wonder who she was," Felix murmured, looking over Gabriella's shoulder at the photograph. "The auctioneer called the lot Untitled Joy. But that's not a name. That's a projection." Gabriella's hand froze for a fraction of a second. She resumed her work instantly, praying he hadn't noticed the glitch. "Does it matter?" she asked, her voice tight. "She is beautiful. She is frozen in a perfect moment. Isn't that enough for you?" "It used to be," Felix admitted. He reached out, his hand hovering near the glass, close enough that his sleeve brushed against Gabriella's arm. The contact was electric, a shock of warmth in the cold room. Gabriella stopped breathing. "But lately," Felix continued, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper, "I find myself jealous of the ocean behind her. I find myself wanting to know what she sounded like. Did she have a loud laugh? Did she whisper? Did she carry secrets?" He turned his head, looking down at Gabriella. She was forced to look up. For the first time, she saw him not as the employer, but as a man starving. His blue eyes were unguarded, raw with a longing that he had projected onto a piece of paper for years. And now he was directing that intensity toward her, the quiet, scarred woman in the oversized cardigan who fixed his broken things. We fall in love with ghosts because they are safe, never realizing that the silence they offer is just an echo of our own loneliness. "Maybe she wasn't happy," Gabriella said, the words escaping before she could check them. "Maybe she was laughing because she was about to lose everything and she didn't know it yet. Maybe the photo is a lie." Felix stiffened. He looked at the photo, then back at Gabriella. He didn't look angry. He looked intrigued. "You see sadness in her," he observed. "I see fragility," Gabriella corrected. She stood up, needing to put distance between them. The proximity was becoming dangerous. She wiped her hands on her apron, hiding the tremors. "The frame is fixed, Mr. Sterling. The fissure is sealed." Felix didn't inspect her work. He kept his eyes on her face. He studied the sharp line of her jaw, the dark, severe hair, and inevitably his gaze landed on the scar that ran down her neck. It was the only thing about her that wasn't hidden by the wool layers. Most people looked away from her scar. They pretended it wasn't there. Felix stared at it with the same reverence he showed his artifacts. "You understand damage," Felix said softly. "It wasn't a question. That is why you are so good at fixing it. You know where the breaks happen." Gabriella pulled her collar up, a defensive reflex. "We all have breaks, sir. Some of us just wear them on the outside." "I wear mine on the inside," Felix confessed. "And I fill the cracks with other people's memories because I don't have any of my own worth keeping." He took a step toward her. The class difference, the vast gulf between the Sterling heir and the hired restorer, seemed to evaporate. There was only a man and a woman in a room full of dead things, both of them vibrating with the need to be understood. "Stay for tea," Felix said. It was a command disguised as an invitation. "Mr. Sterling, Please," he interrupted. "The storm is getting worse. The roads will be dangerous. And I am tired of looking at the photograph alone." Gabriella hesitated. She knew she should leave. She knew that every minute she spent in his presence was a risk. If he asked the wrong question, if he looked too closely at the shape of her eyes, the illusion would shatter. But she looked at him, standing there in the fading light, surrounded by his fortress of solitude, and she felt a pull she couldn't resist. It was the desire to be near the only person who had ever loved her, even if he loved a version of her that was dead. "Just for a moment," Gabriella whispered. Felix smiled. It was small, tentative, like a crack in ice. "Come," he said, turning toward the door. "I have something to show you. I hired a private investigator last week. He sent a file this morning." Gabriella's blood ran cold. She gripped the back of the chair to keep from falling. "An investigator?" she managed to choke out. "Yes," Felix said, pausing at the door, looking back at the photo of Elise. "I need to know what happened to her. I need to know if she is truly gone. Because if there is even a chance she is alive, I need to find her." He walked out of the gallery. Gabriella stood frozen in the center of the room. The fixed frame held the picture of her former self, laughing at the ocean, oblivious to the future. But the woman standing in the shadows was terrified. He wasn't just worshipping the ghost anymore. He was hunting it. And if he found the truth, he wouldn't find a muse. He would find a liar. The library of the Sterling estate was a room designed for brooding. Dark walnut paneling absorbed the light, and the fire crackling in the massive stone hearth offered no real warmth, only a flickering, theatrical illumination. Outside, the storm had graduated from a threat to a bombardment. Rain lashed against the French doors like handfuls of gravel. Felix sat behind his desk, the manila folder open in front of him. Gabriella stood on the other side of the desk. She held her teacup with both hands, using the porcelain as a barrier, a shield against the words that were about to dismantle her. She hadn't taken a sip. The steam had long since dissipated. "Dead," Felix said. The word fell into the room like a stone dropped down a well. 5 years ago. A fire in a loft in Brooklyn. He didn't look up. He was tracing the lines of a photocopied police report with his index finger. "Are they sure?" Gabriella asked. Her voice was a thin wire stretched to the breaking point. She felt a phantom heat on her skin, the memory of smoke filling her lungs, the desperate scramble to the window. "The report is conclusive," Felix replied, his voice devoid of emotion, detached in a way that was more chilling than tears. Dental records were inconclusive due to the intensity of the heat. But she was the tenant. She never surfaced. The case was closed. He flipped a page. A grainy photocopy of a mugshot stared up at him. It wasn't Gabriella. It was a woman named Elise who had been arrested for unpaid debts, for bad checks, for desperation. It was the messy, ugly reality of the girl in the photograph, the reality Gabriella had run from. Felix looked at the mugshot, then at the beautiful, framed photograph on his desk, the one Gabriella had just repaired. He looked between the two images, the art and the truth. His face hardened. A look of distaste curled his lip. "It seems the muse was a criminal," Felix said coldly. "Petty theft, gambling debts, association with loan sharks. It wasn't a tragedy, Gabriella. It was a statistic." Gabriella felt the air leave her lungs. She gripped the edge of the desk. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell him that the debts were her father's, that the theft was bred, that the desperation was the only thing that had kept her alive long enough to be photographed on that pier. She was surviving, Gabriella whispered, her defense of her former self fierce and involuntary. "People do ugly things when they are drowning, Mr. Sterling. That doesn't mean they aren't beautiful." "No," Felix corrected sharply, looking up at her. His blue eyes were ice. "Beauty is pure. Beauty is the moment on the pier. This," he gestured to the police report, "this is just rot. It stains the memory. I almost wish the investigator hadn't found this. I prefer the mystery to this sordid reality. We ask for the truth, but what we really want is a lie that fits the frame we have already built." The rejection was absolute. He didn't just mourn her death. He rejected her life. He loved the image because it was silent, clean, and empty. He hated the woman because she had been messy, struggling, and human. Gabriella looked at him. She realized then that if she told him the truth, if she wiped off the makeup, showed him the full extent of her scars, and said, "I am Elise," he wouldn't embrace her. He would be horrified. He didn't want the survivor. He wanted the martyr. "You speak as if she failed you," Gabriella said, her voice trembling with a mixture of grief and rage. "She didn't know you existed. She failed the potential," Felix said, closing the folder with a slap of finality. He stood up and walked to the window, turning his back on Gabriella. "I have spent years curating a space for perfection. I thought she was the centerpiece, but she was just a common grifter who got lucky with the light one afternoon." He looked at his reflection in the dark glass, overlapping with the storm outside. "Burn the file," Felix commanded softly. Gabriella froze. Sir! Take the folder, Felix said, not turning around. Take it to the incinerator in the basement. Burn it. I want the police report gone. I want the mugshot gone. As far as this house is concerned, Elise died in a tragic, mysterious accident. She was a poet or a painter. She was not this. He was rewriting her history. He was erasing her pain to keep his fantasy pristine. Gabriella looked at the man she had started to feel a connection with. The connection severed instantly, leaving a raw, bleeding end. He was not a savior. He was just another man who wanted a woman to be a flat, two-dimensional object. She reached out and took the folder. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them to be steady. She held her own life, her own suffering, in her hands, ordered to destroy it because it wasn't aesthetic enough for him. And Gabriella, Felix added, still watching the rain. Yes, Mr. Sterling? Leave the photograph on the desk. But cover it. I don't want to look at her tonight. I need to forget what I know. Gabriella felt a tear slide down her cheek, hot and stinging against the scar on her neck. She wiped it away furiously. As you wish, she whispered. She picked up the heavy velvet cloth from the side table and draped it over the framed photo of the laughing girl. She shrouded her past. Then, clutching the folder of her true history to her chest like a wound, she walked to the door. She stopped at the threshold, looking back at the lonely, arrogant man standing by the window. He was trapped in his glass castle, protected from the storm, but he was freezing to death from the inside out. You can burn the paper, Felix, she said, using his first name for the first and last time, her voice gaining a sudden, terrifying strength. But ash leaves a stain that you can never wash out. She didn't wait for his reaction. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway, the heavy wood clicking shut behind her, separating the artisan from the collector, the living from the dead, and the truth from the lie that he loved more than her. The basement of a Sterling estate was the antithesis of the gallery upstairs. Where the gallery was light and controlled atmosphere, the basement was shadow and raw heat. The incinerator roared in the corner, a hungry, iron beast that had swallowed the estate's refuse for decades. Gabriella stood before the open grate. The flames licked the air, casting frantic, dancing shadows against the stone walls. She held the manila folder in her hands. She opened it one last time, looking at the mugshot of the woman she used to be. Elise. The woman in the photo looked tired, defiant, hungry. She didn't look like a muse. She looked like a survivor. Gabriella stepped closer to the fire. She knew she should throw it in. It was what he wanted. It was the safe choice. Burn the past, keep the job, hide in the shadow of the scar. Don't. The voice came from the stairs. Gabriella spun around. Felix stood on the bottom step. He had followed her. He had abandoned the safety of his library and descended into the dark. He looked out of place here, his tweed jacket and polished shoes stark against the grime of the boiler room. You told me to burn it, Gabriella said, her voice echoing over the roar of the fire. You told me you wanted the stain gone. I did, Felix admitted, stepping onto the concrete floor. He moved slowly, as if walking through a minefield. But you said ash leaves a mark, and I realized I have enough marks on my conscience. He reached out his hand. Give me the file, Gabriella. I won't burn it. I'll file it away. I will accept that the muse was flawed. He was trying to be kind. He was trying to be the benevolent collector forgiving the object for being broken. But it wasn't enough. It was still a rejection. He was still talking about her as if she were a concept, a disappointment to be tolerated. Gabriella didn't hand him the file. She threw it on the floor. The papers scattered. The mugshot landed face up between them. She wasn't flawed, Felix. Gabriella cried, the years of silence shattering. She was starving. You look at that police report, and you see a criminal. You see petty theft. Do you know what she stole? A winter coat. Because she was sleeping in a car in December. Felix recoiled, stunned by the ferocity in her voice. Gabriella, you don't need to defend a stranger so passionately. It's over. She's dead. Is she? Gabriella stepped closer, backing him against the cold stone wall. The heat from the furnace behind her created a halo of distortion around her body. You say she's dead because it's convenient. Because dead women don't age. Dead women don't have scars. Dead women don't disappoint you. Why are you doing this? Felix whispered, his eyes wide, searching her face with a sudden, dawning terror. Because you wanted to know the truth, Gabriella said, her voice dropping to a trembling whisper. You hired a detective to find the woman in the photograph. You wanted to find Elise. She reached up. Her hands, usually so steady, shook violently as she pulled the pins from her hair. The heavy dark knot unraveled, falling around her shoulders. It wasn't the golden mane of the photo. It was darker, coarser, but the frame of the face was the same. Then she reached for the collar of her oversized cardigan. She pulled it down. She exposed the scar. It wasn't just a line. It was a map of agony. It started at her jaw, twisting down her neck, a swath of burned tissue that the fire in Brooklyn had left as a signature. It was the reason she hid. It was the reason she worked in the dark. Felix stared. He looked at the scar. He looked at her eyes, the blue-green eyes that he had studied in black and white for 3 years. The recognition didn't hit him like a wave. It hit him like a landslide. The air left the room. My God, Felix breathed. He didn't move away. He couldn't. Elise. Elise died in the fire, she said, tears finally spilling over, tracking through the dust on her cheeks. That's what I let them believe. Because Elise owed money to dangerous men. Because Elise was tired of running. So I became Gabriella. I became the woman who fixes things, hoping that maybe, if I fixed enough beautiful things, I could fix myself. She looked at him, defiant and broken. But you don't want the fix, do you, Felix? You want the fantasy. You want the girl on the pier. Well, look at me. I'm right here. And I'm ugly. I'm a criminal. I'm the stain you wanted to burn. We try to strip the varnish to find the masterpiece underneath, only to realize that the cracks in the canvas are the only thing holding the painting together. Felix stood there, paralyzed. His world was inverting. The ghost he had worshipped was standing in front of him, smelling of turpentine and smoke, screaming for him to see her. He looked at the police report on the floor. He looked at the woman. He realized that the criminal he had sneered at was the same woman who had gently repaired his frames for months. The woman who made him tea. The woman who understood silence. He had loved the image, but he had unknowingly fallen in love with the survivor. I'm not ugly, Felix whispered. It was a reflex, a denial of her self-hatred. Don't lie to me, Gabriella snapped, turning away, unable to bear his pity. I ruined your perfect picture. I'm sorry. I'll pack my things. I'll leave tonight. She took a step toward the stairs. No. Felix moved. He didn't grab her arm. He wasn't that presumptuous. He stepped in front of her, blocking the exit. He reached out, his hands hovering, trembling. You didn't ruin the picture, Felix said, his voice thick with emotion. You survived it. He looked at the scar on her neck. He didn't look away in horror. He looked at it with the same intense, analytical focus he gave to a Renaissance masterpiece. He saw the pain. He saw the endurance. I told you I was jealous of the ocean, Felix murmured, stepping closer, until he was breathing the same air as her. I was jealous because I wanted to know her secrets. And now you are telling me. I lied to you, Gabriella sobbed, the fight draining out of her. I've been lying every day. And I've been blind every day, Felix countered. He reached out and, with infinite slowness, brushed his thumb against the edge of her scar. Gabriella flinched, expecting disgust. But his touch was warm. It was reverent. I thought beauty was perfection, Felix whispered, his eyes locking onto hers. But I was wrong. Perfection is cheap. It's easy. This. He traced the line of her jaw, past the scar to her chin. This is expensive. This cost you everything. He picked up the mugshot from the floor. He didn't throw it in the fire. He folded it carefully and put it in his pocket, right next to his heart. Don't leave, Felix said, his voice breaking. Please, don't vanish again. I can't lose you twice. Gabriella looked up at him. She saw the man who had built a museum to keep the world out, now standing in the dirt of the basement, begging for the messy, scarred reality to stay. The tension in the room shifted from confrontation to a fragile, terrifying hope. The varnish was stripped away, and for the first time they were seeing the true colors underneath. The ascent from the basement was slow. They climbed the narrow, concrete stairs not as employer and employee, but as two people emerging from a bunker after a bombing run. The air grew cooler as they rose, leaving the roar of the incinerator behind, replaced by the hushed, sacred silence of the main house. Outside, the storm had finally broken. The rain had reduced to a soft, rhythmic tapping against the glass, and the clouds were beginning to tear open, revealing a bruised purple twilight. Felix led Gabriella back to the east wing. He didn't let go of her arm. His grip was light, grounding, a physical tether ensuring she wouldn't slip back into the shadows she had inhabited for 5 years. They entered the gallery. The smell of turpentine and old varnish greeted them, the scent of Gabriella's work, the scent of preservation. The photograph of the laughing girl on the pier was still shrouded under the heavy velvet cloth where Gabriella had left it. It stood in the alcove like a covered mirror, hiding its reflection. Gabriella stopped in the center of the room. She felt exposed without her cardigan pulled up, her scar visible in the soft track lighting. She felt the urge to run, to hide, to retreat into the anonymity of the restorer. But Felix was looking at her, and his gaze was a barrier she couldn't cross. I spent 3 years coming into this room every morning, Felix said, walking toward the alcove. He didn't look at the covered easel. He looked at the empty space beside it. I came here to worship a memory. I thought that if I stared at her long enough, I could absorb some of that joy. I thought I was preserving her. He reached out and took hold of the velvet cloth. But you can't preserve a person, Gabriella, he whispered. You can only preserve an object. With a fluid motion, he pulled the cloth away. The image of Elise, young, wild, unmarked, was revealed. She was laughing at the ocean, frozen in a moment of naive perfection. It was beautiful. It was flawless. And it was completely dead. Felix looked at the photo for a long moment. Then he turned his back on it. He faced Gabriella. She doesn't have a story, Felix said, gesturing blindly behind him to the photo. She is just a second in time. But you. He walked toward her, closing the distance until he could see the pulse beating in her neck, right where the scar tissue began. You are the novel. You are the tragedy, and the survival, and the chapters one haven't read yet. Gabriella looked at the photo over his shoulder. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel a pang of loss. She felt pity for the girl on the pier. That girl had no idea how hard the world could hit. That girl was fragile. Gabriella was iron. I'm not the woman you fell in love with, Gabriella warned him, her voice trembling. I'm the wreckage. No, Felix corrected gently. He reached up and touched her face, his thumb grazing the edge of the scar, tracing the map of her pain with a tenderness that made her knees weak. We worship the image because it is safe, never realizing that the silence it offers is just an echo of our own loneliness. He repeated the thought that had haunted the gallery for years, but this time he dismantled it. I am done with safety, Felix vowed. I don't want the echo anymore. I want the voice, even if it screams, even if it cries. I want the living thing. He leaned in. He didn't kiss her lips. He kissed her scar. It was a gesture of such profound acceptance that it shattered the last of Gabriella's defenses. A sob escaped her throat, a sound of release that she had been holding back since the night of the fire. She clung to his tweed jacket, burying her face in his chest, smelling the rain and the old paper, realizing that she wasn't just holding a collector. She was holding a man who had finally found something he didn't want to put behind glass. They stood there for a long time as the twilight deepened into night. The gallery, once a mausoleum for a dead girl, began to feel like a home. "What do we do with her?" Gabriella asked later, looking at the photograph. "Do we take it down?" Felix looked at the image of Elise one last time. He saw the joy, but he no longer felt the envy. "No," Felix said. "Leave it. Let it hang there." He took Gabriella's hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, the scarred skin against the smooth, the artisan against the historian. "Let it hang as a reminder," he said softly. "A reminder that perfection is just a trick of the light. The real masterpiece is what happens after the camera stops clicking." He led her out of the gallery, turning off the lights as they went. The photograph faded into the darkness, becoming just paper and ink, stripped of its power. Outside the heavy doors, in the warmth of the hallway, Felix didn't let go of her hand. He didn't ask her to fix anything. He didn't ask her to hide. For the first time in his life, Felix Sterling wasn't looking back at what he had lost. He was walking forward with what he had found. He loved her photograph for years, believing it was the most beautiful thing in the world, until he held the woman who survived the fire and realized that a picture is just a shadow, but a scar is proof that the light refused to go out.